Oh look kids, it's Dracula on Intellivision. Ooh. Yeah, what better way to kick off the October of horrific horror that's going to be a thing for the next few weeks. And I'll tell you what, I'm not sure which is more terrifying. This stock photo cover of a kid in a vampire costume, or the fact that I'm playing Intellivision. Fun fact, never touched an actual Intellivision before. The closest thing I got to sampling the games was that Intellivision Lives compilation that came out into 2000s, but that doesn't quite capture the experience, especially in regards to translating this to this. But yeah, I got an Intellivision 2 and a bunch of games for an early birthday gift this past summer, and Dracula is the first game I tested with the machine, so you're all in for a bit of a treat as I dwell into what has been, for me at least, largely unventured territory until now. Released exclusively for the Intellivision in 1983 courtesy of iMagic, one of the more prolific third-party developers of the time, Dracula is a conceptually simple game. You take control of the Count himself, and you have to chase humans to suck the blood that will keep you alive. You'll have to do this blood-sucking before the sun starts to rise, at which point you'll need to return to your resting place before you start to melt and die. Difficulty settings determines how many humans you have to eat before being able to return home, with the number getting higher with every round. And once you've met your quota, a wolf will begin chasing you around, forcing you to retreat. Now you could change it to a bat to fly about quicker, but you'll need to watch for these purple pterodactyl looking things, I think they're supposed to be vultures, and make sure they don't grab you and fly off screen because that's an instant game over. Impeding your progress are police officers who will attempt to stab you with their wooden stakes, which will stun you momentarily. Unlike the locals, you can't simply bite a police officer to kill them. It only stuns them for some reason, but instead you'll need to send zombies after them. This is done by biting locals with the lower right fire button on your Intellivision controller, and they'll turn into a zombie that you, or a buddy if you could spare one, can control with the second controller. It's somewhat cumbersome on the single player front because you need to control the zombie with the other controller, and more often than not, I usually don't bother. Dude, I just got an Intellivision a short while ago. Come on, I'm trying to use the one controller. But the fact that you have that option available is quite novel. Let's try that again. The fact that you have the option available is quite novel and gives Dracula an extra bit of depth you normally wouldn't expect from a game of this ilk. I'm keeping all that in, by the way. I don't care. At the end of the day, though, Dracula is a game with a simple concept, and you eventually do get to a point where the gameplay starts to feel a bit repetitive after a while, as is usually the case with the great majority of these older titles. Thing is, if the core gameplay is compelling enough on some surface level at least, you tend to not mind the repetition, and Dracula was surprisingly the case here. The single player is the main thing, but there's also two-player alternating plays where players take turns between rounds, as well as another mode where the second player controls one of the hapless humans. Neither mode was tested for obvious reasons for this video, but they do sound like fun times. If there is a complaint to be had with the game, well, it's not the game itself, it's mostly in relation to the Intellivision controllers, which I will say is not the most comfortable thing to use, and certainly when it comes to moving Dracula around, the disc feels very, very mushy and prone to unresponsiveness. Whenever you see Dracula move about awkwardly and pause momentarily, it's because I'm struggling with moving the poor fellow with this contraption that simply refuses to function. Now I could probably attribute this to aging hardware and such, but regardless, even a pristine controller would net my same quibbles, and is probably the main thing that kept me away from Intellivision for so long. I'm only glad that I got the second model, which has replaceable controllers, because otherwise I'd be screwed. With that said, once you figure out what buttons do what, the left and right buttons aren't exactly the same functionally, Dracula is a pretty fun time. The basic concept works really well even if the hardware doesn't. There's a couple neat ideas that gives it a bit of flavor, and I found myself having a good time, which speaks to the quality of the gameplay that I can enjoy the game despite some questionable hardware. I'll try not to make this a recurring theme in future Intellivision videos, but it's a big thing that I needed to get out of the way here. So I'll say here, Dracula isn't a bad looking game. The character sprites are a little less defined, but you can make out Dracula and the humans, the little pterodactyl and wolf things. The village is pretty well rendered, fairly simplistic visually, but with lots of neat touches like lampposts and puddles. The cemetery is also pretty nice looking. There's some lightning flashes, and the scrolling's relatively smooth. Certainly a much cleaner overall presentation compared to its Atarian competitor and various games there. Sound is relatively minimal for the most part. Couple jingles here, couple sound effects and thunderclaps there. When it comes to overall sound quality, Intellivision comes off as slightly higher quality than that of Atari, even if it boils down to merely cleaner sounding beeps and bleeps. Overall, Dracula kicks off the Intellivision journey on a high note with a superb little game that's a fairly straightforward concept that's well executed. Pretty impressive showcase of what the system could do, I think. With its scrolling and mild presentation, and the variety of things you could do here makes Dracula a bite above the rest. Great stuff here, exclusively on Intellivision, unless it shows up on AmicoVision or whatever it's called, I don't know. But regardless, Dracula on Intellivision is a good time for both the living and the dead. And also the undead. Well worth checking out.